Hi, everybody. Thanks again for being with us tonight and for braving the traffic and the rain. I am Jen Johns. I'm the Executive Director of the Academy of Medicine of Cleveland in Northern Ohio. As Dominica mentioned, this is a continuation of a longstanding partnership between the Bar Association and the Academy. We've actually been partnering on events for about 100 years, so I'm glad to be part of that legacy. Today's program is called a Lauer Hour. It's actually named after Dr. William Lauer, who was one of the founders of Cleveland Clinic. He left behind, when he passed away, a little bit of money for the Academy to do some education, and I'm happy to say that we're continuing that in the spirit of his name. He was known during his tenure at the clinic for bringing national and international experts to Cleveland to talk on medical topics, and they were called Lauer Lectures. So when we decided to bring this programming back, we learned quite quickly that Lauer Lecture didn't sell as well as Lauer Hour, so we added a happy hour component. So thank you for being here. I hope that you'll stay and network after the program, and I am just as excited as I'm sure you are to hear about this extremely relevant topic from our experts who are here tonight. So I will not take any more time away from them. Thank you.
Wonderful. I'm Kristen England. I'm a retired physician from the Cleveland Clinic, and I used to be the president of the Academy of Medicine for Cleveland and Northern Ohio. So that's how I got this wonderful job tonight. But I would like for my three wonderful esteemed colleagues to please introduce themselves. I will then start off with a series of questions to keep the conversation going, and then we'll follow it up with audience questions. So please feel free to write down or keep in mind any questions that you might have for them to answer afterwards. So let me start off with Stacy.
Hello, good evening. My name is Stacy Cozart Martin, and I am an immigration attorney. I have my own firm, MJB Immigration in Independence, Ohio, and I have been practicing immigration law for 25 years, although I may not look it.
Too young.
Fabulous.
Absolutely.
Good evening. My name is Michelle Block. I'm Associate General Counsel and Director of Litigation Clinical Risk at MetroHealth. I'm also on the Society of Ohio Healthcare Attorneys Board.
Hi, everyone. I'm Kathleen Laskey Donovan. I work at the Legal Aid Society of Cleveland. I'm part of our medical legal partnership team. We have otherwise known as MLPs with MetroHealth, Cleveland Clinic, and UH. And I mostly practice immigration law, but also a smattering of other things like family law, public benefits, and that's mostly it.
Fantastic. So let's go ahead and get started. Stacy, I'm going to start off with you. So why is this issue gaining such renewed urgency now? Immigration enforcement isn't new. So what has changed that makes it important for us to have this conversation on a rainy Thursday evening after work?
Well, clearly nothing has changed in immigration. Just kidding. As you may or may not know, I had to look this up, but Trump has issued 181 executive orders pertaining just to immigration in the first 100 days. 181, right? So a lot has changed that's brought us here on this lovely Thursday evening. What I think is most relevant to you folks is the executive order pertaining to protecting American people against invasion. Why is that pertinent to all of you? Well, what that executive order did is it prompted the Department of Homeland Security to issue another order revoking what is called protected areas. Again, why is that important to all of us? Hospitals, schools, and churches used to be protected areas. And what that means is that the CBP, or the enforcement arm, Customs and Border Patrol, or ICE agents, who is also the enforcement wing of Department of Homeland Security, could not come in to these structures and look for immigrants who either have removal orders or who have been undocumented, right? They were safe havens, potentially. Couldn't come in, couldn't ask questions. Well, that whole thing has now changed. Now ICE can come in to any public area and ask questions about people who are in those public areas. The reason it's important for hospitals is there's a lot of public areas in hospitals, right? There are not a lot of areas that are designated as private. So we're going to talk about in a little bit what that means. But that means as physicians, residents, fellows, attendings, you all need to be aware of what happens if ICE comes into an area that you are in, specifically maybe an emergency room or a lobby, looking for patients, looking for people in general. They can also look at public sign-ins. So if you're in the emergency room and you have a list of people you're checking off who've checked in to see a physician, ICE can now look at that. So we can talk about it more in depth, but that's why we are here on a rainy Thursday afternoon.
Well, that's a bit sobering, so remember there is a bar in the back. But in follow-up to your points, kind of given this rescission of the Department of Homeland Security sensitive locations and the ICE enforcement being limited, can you give us some examples of how this policy change might affect more specifically some of the medical settings where we're going to be seeing our patients and practicing?
Absolutely. So I will give you an example. In Tucson, Arizona, there were ICE agents literally waiting for a woman who was in labor and gave birth, and then immediately detained her and her U.S. citizen baby immediately after she gave birth. So this is how serious we are talking about ICE coming and getting people. It's not just rhetoric. It's not something that the president is just saying. It's legitimately happening. So you need to be prepared. So what does it mean if ICE comes into your facility? They can enter any public space. So we talked about that. Lobbies, emergency rooms, anywhere where the general public can go. They cannot go into any private area. What is a private area? A patient's room, maybe a waiting room where the patients, higher up in the facilities where it's not just the main waiting room or the emergency room. We don't know, right? The hospitals should really be designating what is a private space and what is a public space. Otherwise, ICE is going to assume that everything is public, and the hospital is going to have to defend what's private versus what's public. Most of the hospitals in the Cleveland area all have a protocol for what needs to happen if ICE comes into your facility. So I would strongly suggest that you talk to your leadership at your specific institution. I know the Cleveland Clinic, the protocol is you call the Cleveland Clinic police, right? UH or university hospitals, you're going to talk to the attending on staff. They're going to get a hold of the legal department and figure out what's going to happen. Because not only can they come into the public space, but if they have a judicial warrant signed by a judge, and there are examples of what a judicial warrant looks like in the references that we gave you, the links, thank you. You can look to see it has to be signed. It has to have a specific person's name. It cannot be issued by a government agency. It has to be signed by a judge and issued by a court. So sometimes you'll see, they'll flash it real quick like, oh, here's my warrant, right? No. You need to look at it and make sure that they're actually looking for the person that's listed on there and that they actually have an actual signed warrant that they can go in to a non-public area. Also, you may want to offer telemedicine more than you normally would. A lot of undocumented immigrants don't want to leave the house. They are very afraid that they're going to be picked up, their families are going to be picked up. And we've had clients who've been picked up who are literally driving on their way to church and accidentally ran a stop sign. So if it's possible, talk to your patients. If they're undocumented, let them know that you're available for telemedicine. I would also suggest not putting their immigration status in any of their medical records because those potentially could get access to those. So we want to leave out any identifying factors as to their immigration status and their medical records. Finally, I will say if you are a physician and you're talking to undocumented family members and someone may be sick or you're not quite sure what's going to happen, it might be beneficial to talk to them about doing medical powers of attorney. Because if the family member who is in charge of the family gets detained for some reason and the family members don't have access to medical care for their children or even like a healthcare power of attorney or just a power of attorney in general to get to bank accounts, all of that. They're coming to you because they trust you. You're another resource in the community. So any information that you can give them would highly be appreciated.
Wow, that's a lot of great information. Now, I know this is a lot of information coming at you in a short period of time. Just know that this is being recorded. So if you or your colleagues need to refer back to some of this information, we'll be making that available on all the websites. Just keeping in mind that this is general information. This is not specific legal information for any specific case. It is just really some basic general information. So here I am, covering the tushies of my legal colleagues here. So anyway, everybody here certainly in the room will have a chance to offer questions, but we certainly wanted to get some questions from some of our colleagues ahead of time from the community. So for Michelle, I've got a question here for you. So please look at the screen.
Hello, my name is Adriana Whalen. I'm a primary care provider and the medical director of our HIV and harm reduction program here at the centers. Thank you for including me in this discussion. My question to the panel is, if an ICE agent show up to an outpatient clinic, what are the patient's rights for protection? And how do we keep our staff safe? Thank you very much.
I don't think anyone has that question, right? Nobody's thinking about that. Or is that what everyone's thinking about? Because I'm curious, by a show of hands, how many individuals from their respective institutions or their health centers have a plan in place if outside law enforcement were to show up? By a show of hands? Okay. I'm assuming then the majority of the individuals in the room are perhaps from the legal space rather than from the medical? Thank you. I'm seeing some nods. Well, I think it's incredibly important, right, is that we plan. Really, the executive orders to date have not changed anything on how we as hospitals handle outside law enforcement, either presenting and or requesting information for patient information. It feels totally different. But for example, if an outside law enforcement shows up from, like a police department or a sheriff's department, and they're asking for, hey, I believe that you have so-and-so on site and there is a warrant, will you let us know when that person is ready to be discharged? We are in the business of providing health care, right, to our patients. And so if you would like to do law enforcement or would like us to do law enforcement, we're not going to do that. But if you want to do your law enforcement responsibilities, right, then you need to show us the actual warrant and you need to have somebody, sit on the patient, et cetera. And if you don't meet all those, criteria, then it just, you're not going past the main lobby. So I draw that over to the ICE, what happens if an ICE shows up. So MetroHealth, similar to many other area hospitals, there's a Northeast Ohio consortium, and it's made up of multiple law departments, right, with SUMA, UH, CCF, obviously MetroHealth, Firelands, St. V's are the ones that immediately come to mind, Southwest also. So the law department, we meet quarterly, and we talk about all these kind of hot topics, right? And so my, presentation today or my conversation today is really representing the hospital in-house counsel perspective and not necessarily that of just MetroHealth. But the number one thing that I can recommend is that from an employee perspective, you need to have a process in place, right? So recent executive orders on immigration, they've not required hospitals to change our current policies relating to law enforcement and how they present and what they have to show to get PHI information. But again, it feels different, right? Because it's ICE. They may or may not have training on HIPAA and PHI and what the requirements are. And it just feels different because we feel like we can be, thrown in jail, or you can have sanctions, you can have all of these bad things happen to you if you don't comply, but really they're the ones who have to comply to get access to that information, right? So patient immigration status, right, similar to what my colleague Stacy said, hospitals do not and are not required to collect or report patients' immigration status as a condition of care, period. Compliance with privacy laws. I mean, that's why it's really important that we talk about PHI and, as Stacy mentioned, that judicial warrant, because PHI is incredibly sacred. Regardless of what somebody else says, like, I want this information, they don't belong here, they don't deserve here, they committed this crime and that's why they should leave. It doesn't matter. They still have PHI and that's protected, and we have to make sure that the I's are dotted and T's are crossed to even get access to that information, meaning acknowledging whether or not the individual they're looking for is even a patient at our hospital, right? So it's really important that you work with your compliance team relating to that. Right, the disclosure of patient information under HIPAA, right, our PHI, it's either with patient authorization or in this case with a judicial warrant, as Stacy outlined. Remember, though, that when it comes to mandatory reporting, regardless, this is all regardless of what the immigration status is. If someone comes in and they're having, they're making complaints of, sexual abuse, neglect, physical abuse, et cetera, the list, as a mandatory reporter, right, we still need to report that regardless of, again, the immigration status. So law enforcement on campus. So the first thing I can recommend team, clinical colleagues, is to work with your administration to create an outline. The one at MetroHealth and UH and CCF, literally, it's very, very basic because it doesn't change. It doesn't say, like, if ICE shows up, do this. It's really, if any outside, law enforcement agency shows up, we do a ton of education to make sure they know that pause. We have the right to say pause. We are not saying we're refusing. We are not. We are going to be, a partner to assist with whatever information they're asking for, if they have the appropriate documentation and they have the authority to request, right? So at, MetroHealth, UH, and CCF, in our conversations, it's all kind of the similar process, right? Someone comes in and they introduce themselves and, we'll say they're from an outside law enforcement. So whoever is receiving them has to be educated to know, all right, thanks for coming in. I'm going to escort you to either this empty patient room or this office, this empty office, right? And you're going to take a picture, or because you're not going to likely have time to go photocopy, badges or things like that. Take a picture of the badge and send it to either the local, if you have, MHPD or security on site, right, and or your administrator on call or your legal team. It really just depends on your process. Typically what it is, the front desk will know to escort them, take a picture of the photograph, and then to call MHPD. Like for us, it's MHPD or it's UH PD or CCF, and then they will help. So it's like, law enforcement to law enforcement. Same if like a lawyer calls one of our physicians, it's really no different. We always educate our physicians, like, you deal with patients and you work with, taking the best care of patients possible. If a lawyer calls you, send them our way. We will make sure we will take care of that because it's a lawyer to lawyer. What are you really asking in the subpoena? What are you, whatever. Same with, law enforcement to law enforcement. You are not in this alone. You shouldn't be. You should be working, let law enforcement, or whatever your team has established, make sure they're the ones who are, dealing with it. And so then after that, so law enforcement shows up, and because there's no time constraint, they can't say, I demand this right now. I mean, they can say that, of course, but they can't do anything. You're complying. You're getting the appropriate people involved. So you have a photocopy or a picture that you forwarded off to the local, your police department, your security department, your administrator on call, your legal or your compliance, whoever it is that your protocol, outlines. And then that person shows up and asks for the paperwork that they have presented with. No paperwork, well, this was a really nice conversation, come back with the paperwork, right? You're not going any further than that. But you're expecting to see a judicial warrant, as Stacy outlined. And our handout has references and, shows what that looks like. But again, that's our jobs, right? Like as in-house counsel or outside counsel, or my colleague from legal aid can assist. But ultimately, we need to decipher what it is and to give you the green light or red light as to what we're doing here. And then we have steps on what to do next. But to have a judicial warrant relating to even acknowledging whether or not a individual is actually a patient within, in a private space in the healthcare system, it's a really high bar. So, you've got to make sure that that's passed. So my best piece of advice is to make sure that you work with your administration to have a process. It doesn't matter how big, if you have like a private practice or you're part of a large organization, you need to know what the process is. And I can tell you from like the organizations and the healthcare systems that we work with, they all have processes in place. It may just be that you don't know what it is as you sit here today. But if nothing else, at least you'll be walking away thinking, I have got to get in touch with legal, or I have got to get in touch with our, police department or whatnot to make sure that not only me, but my front staff, because they're the ones who are kind of the buffer. They're the ones who are going to be greeting the individual, right? And having to know, keep it calm and just think it is no different. Of course it's different. It's going to feel different, but it's no different than any other outside law enforcement. The EOs have not changed the rules. So make sure that your team feel confident and comfortable in how to, assess and address that. And when it comes to the patient perspective, right, I mean, we're talking in-house counsel and we represent, right, our healthcare systems, but we always care about patient care. It's very similar, think about it in that regards. If they're looking for someone, you're still going to pull them aside, but we can get into like what happens in the lobby area, right? That is a public area, but for purposes of this question, right, it's really making sure that you, as employees of, healthcare institutions or of practice groups, how to handle those pieces.
Great advice. I can't think of anything more anxiety-provoking other than a medical emergency than to have law enforcement showing up at your front desk. So being able to keep calm is not only going to help, having a protocol is going to help everybody keep calm, and it's also going to help keep the patients calm and comforted as well. So all of that is wonderful advice. Michelle, I've got another question for you, though. This is going to be coming from one of my former colleagues, so it's a video question.
Hi, I'm Marissa Tinxer-Patton, ID physician. Thanks so much for taking my question. I work with many colleagues, staff, residents, fellows, and students who are here on visas, including J1. They're concerned about their status and risk for deportation. I was just talking to one of the fellows today who decided not to go home with her vacation time. So my question is, what are their risks and what steps can they take to protect themselves and their families? Thank you so much.
Michelle.
Yeah.
Or anyone. Let's start. Michelle get started.
Fair concerns, totally legit. I mean, I don't have a crystal ball. I can't tell you what's going to happen at borders. I can't tell you, what EOs may be coming down the pike, especially hearing that we have, let me go to my notes, 181 immigration-related EOs in the first 100+ days of this term. But what I can tell you is that whether you're employed or you're a student or trainee on visas, you're here appropriately and you're here legally. And so the federal, immigration and visa policies, it is completely fluid. It can change one day to the next. Unfortunately, that's what we find ourselves in right now. But again, as of right now, there's no new policies, right, that directly impact visa holders. But we know that there's been issues right at the borders coming in, or, when they're trying to leave or things like that, where appropriate, legitimate, valid, active visas are being challenged, or someone didn't have a copy of the visa paperwork or whatever it might have been that resulted in a prolonged detention or delay, right, in moving forward in whatever the next step may be. So travel concerns, similar to the recommendation I gave a few minutes ago, it really comes down to preparation. Again, it doesn't directly, there's no EO as we sit here today that is putting travel restrictions on individuals here who are on valid visas. But it doesn't feel that way, right? We have residents, we have fellows, we have physicians. Colleagues here, like I'm part of a EMBA program. We are going to Seoul next week, and I'm with a number of physicians from your various institutions, and several of my colleagues are not going because their institutions recommended. They're here on, they have green cards or they have visas, and because they're, physicians and they have certain time, right, but they're needed back in the hospitals, their team's recommendation was that they not go. But it's not because they can't go, it's because of the risk, right? So it comes down to preparation. What are your teams talking about? When we're talking about administrative leadership, your GME office, you have a lot of resources, HR, of course, and of course the Office of Professional Affairs. So how is your system handling travel? Is it work-related travel? Is it leisurely travel? So preparedness is really important. If you are gonna go, right, do you have copies, of all your documents, even just if you're not traveling internationally, just domestic travel, but do you have a list of contact numbers? God forbid you are detained and you have, valid, active visa. Who do you call? Are you calling the Office of Professional Affairs? Are you calling at your organization? Are you calling the GME office? Have you coordinated with them, or is there a central location where all this information is being gathered? For example, at our hospital, and I know at some of my other colleagues' hospitals, it's the Office of Professional Affairs who's kind of gathering everything, right? So kind of the one place you can go, and then they'll send you different places depending on what the issue is. And so my question, or my ask of you would be, reach out. If you don't know, if you were to travel, who would you call if there was an issue? Have a conversation with your organization as to who those contacts are. Make sure you have those phone numbers. Make sure I'm a litigator by training, so I think of worse, like if your phone's taken away or your passport or it's just held, like make sure you have multiple copies of all these things because, this is your safety and welfare and of your colleagues as well. Again, you're here appropriately, legitimately, but again, it just happens to be a student visa or trainee visa or work visa, and right now those are getting more scrutiny than they ever have. So work with your team on that, your own organization. And don't forget mental health and well-being. Many organizations, even smaller, local healthcare practices offer like confidential, like mental health and things like that that could be supportive in this kind of time of uncertainty. So again, I apologize as I sit here, I don't have a crystal ball, but I can tell you with confidence that as we sit here in this very moment, there's nothing saying you can't travel or that you shouldn't travel, but it's riskier now than ever coming back that you may have, unnecessary perhaps detention, meaning delay, right, in coming back, whether it might be a couple hours or longer. So that's the guidance that I would give to you.
My guidance is do not travel. Do not travel. If you take nothing away from today, do not travel. Although the executive orders don't change the regulations, you are correct. They have 100% changed how things are interpreted and how things are happening. We had a rash of students get their visas canceled for absolutely no reason. And it took lots of litigation to get that overturned, and my guess is it's going to come back at some point. If you are an international medical graduate, do not travel unless absolutely 100% an emergency. We've heard stories of people getting detained at the port of entry. They are looking at your social media, whether they are asking you for your phones or they have that already before you show up there. We have heard reports of that as well. The local offices, when you're going for interviews, are looking at social media and asking you questions. So I would highly recommend not to travel and to contact your legal counsel before you make any moves. Because again, they haven't changed. Technically, the regulations are what they are, But the way that this administration is interpreting those regulations and enforcing the executive's orders is nothing like I have ever seen in the 25 years that I've been practicing immigration law. It is a scary time, and I don't mean, you're right, remain calm, right? Because we all have to remain calm, but educate yourselves. If you don't know, ask. There are a lot of attorneys in Cleveland that will give you free consultations. Each of your hospitals have legal counsel on staff. If they don't know immigration, they will refer you out to someone who does immigration. Don't rely upon what the internet says, and don't rely upon your friends. Ask. We're all here. This is a time that the community needs to come together and support one another, whether that be patients, whether that be physicians, whether that be residents, whether you're just working at the hospital. I mean, 20% of healthcare workers are foreign nationals. 20%. Everybody's got to watch out for one another.
Thank you, both of you. That's all great advice. And again, TikTok and Instagram are not your friends. So remember that.
Nor are the lawyers that allegedly are on those platforms.
Oh, there you go. Okay. So let's move down to Kathleen. Kathleen, let me ask you a question. So Legal Aid does so much wonderful work for all the citizens of the Cleveland area, but how does Legal Aid support the non-citizens in protecting their rights, both before and after potential detention by immigration authorities?
So one thing we're focusing on now is training our clients to know their constitutional rights, letting our clients know if ICE agents come to their door, like what both Stacy and Michelle said, if they do not have a signed judicial warrant, you do not have to let ICE in. And the reason why we keep bringing up if they don't have the signed judicial warrant is because they often don't. They often just have an ICE administrative warrant, and it says at the top, warrant for arrest of alien. And it says alien because under immigration law, that is how immigrants are referred to. So we're engaging in one-on-one trainings with our clients. We're also doing Know Your Rights trainings with client-facing organizations in the community so they can educate their clients. We're helping parents prepare powers of attorney in case they are detained so that there can be arrangements made for the care and custody of any U.S. citizen children who they don't want to bring back to their country with them if they are detained and removed. And under immigration law, mostly we're talking, you'll hear us say removed because that's the term. In the past, it was referred to as deportation. We are representing immigrants. We're helping them file applications for relief. We have a big focus at Legal Aid on representing victims of crime here in the U.S. or in their home countries. We're filing those applications with the Immigration Agency, USCIS, or with the Immigration Court if they're in removal proceedings. We are representing people who are detained in ICE detention and to request bond. So an immigration judge has the authority to release an immigrant on bond while their removal proceedings are pending. And the factors that the immigration judge has to consider, well, first off, the immigrant has to show they're not a danger to the community or a flight risk. And then the judge considers whether the person has a fixed address in the U.S., their length of address in the U.S., any family ties, employment history, have they been appearing for their removal hearings thus far? Do they have criminal history? Do they have a history of past immigration violations? Have they attempted to flee prosecution? How did they enter the U.S.? Did they come with a visa or did they sneak in over the border? And then they can also consider whether the immigrant might be able to qualify for some type of immigration relief. We recently just hosted a CLE for volunteer attorneys to train them on how to complete applications for asylum to try and increase local capacity in that regard. We participate in a statewide task force of immigration legal providers in Ohio to collaborate and train and strategize on how to best help our clients. And as I mentioned before, we have any one of you can refer any patients to legal aid, regardless of whether or not we have a medical legal partnership with your hospital. Like I said, we do have them with MetroHealth, Cleveland Clinic, and UH. And the way that works is that the medical provider can refer a patient with legal problems to us. But anyone here can refer regardless of whether you have an MLP or not.
Okay, now let me get into another question. This one is going to be for Michelle, coming back here. And this is also a video question.
My name is Julie Hertzer, and I'm a pediatrician in the Cleveland area. And I also have a question. In healthcare with charting, can you outline some of the key practices that are especially important right now to protect our patients and why?
So Michelle, you had just mentioned earlier that we're not required to document a patient's immigration status. I mean, as to Julie's question, can we actually harm them by doing that? Please answer.
Yeah, so the executive orders, right, there's no change in our ethical duty, right, to provide the best clinical care possible to our patients. Sorry. Bar right here.
You want to move it off to the side? You can move it off to the side if it's easier.
So there's no change in the, I'm just kidding. There's no change in the ethical and professional duty, right, to provide care to all patients. Wow, this is quite loud. So the key documentation practices to emphasize, nothing different than what you already know, is document clinically relevant information. Clinically relevant. Those are the key phrases. That's what every clinician, I mean, whether we're doing, new nursing orientation, we're doing, residency education, lateral provider education, it's just this constant reminder to just document what's clinically relevant. We also, at MetroHealth, we provide care and treatment, right? Or we provide the care and treatment for our correctional medicine patient population, and we're always reminding our clinicians clinically relevant information. The rest, leave it at the door, right? That's being handled elsewhere, and the same here, clinically relevant. As the patient presents to you, what is relevant to the care treatment plan that you're going to develop with this patient? Avoid subjective, speculative language, right? If you do happen to know that they are going to be leaving the country or that they have something coming up and that they may not be able to complete the sequence, right, of medication, then take that into account, right, as you are preparing the care plan with the patient. But it's really important, right? No subjective, speculative language. Chart what's medically necessary and fact-based. I mean, that is just gold standard across the board. It sounds so easy, but it's just so important to remember. Being consistent, right, with the standardized care and regulatory compliance and maintaining privacy protections. But I think when it comes to the documentation piece, if it's relevant, include it. If it's not, don't. So putting someone's, immigration status, I'm not sure how that comes up in a natural, like, if a patient has an appointment, the mother shows up with the child with a pediatrician, why would that come up, or how would that come up? And if it does come up, but again, it's not relating to a child, a 3-year-old's wellness visit, why would we document that? Not saying to include or not include information that we didn't before this administration. It's just a reminder to make sure that the documentation is factually relevant and clinically relevant to, what's going on. Remember when patients are applying for the financial aid process or as they're going through registration, at some point it may become, it might become apparent, right, that there's no social security number or something like that. But again, that doesn't change how we're providing care and treatment, and that should not end up in the medical record, in the patient's, the progress notes and all that. So I think my biggest recommendation is a reminder that nothing has changed and to make sure that it's clinically relevant and factual.
Excellent advice. Let's go back to Katie now. I've got a question. So you often hear concerns at legal aid from clients about job security issues such as, the risk of traveling home, but using public benefits as well. Can you speak to the types of questions that come up in these areas are there things such as medical letters of support or certain medical exams that clients may need?
Sure. You may encounter immigration in several ways in your practice as medical providers. One thing you may hear a lot about is fear of using public benefits because of something called public charge. Public charge is an inadmissibility ground, so that means it's a reason why the U.S. government would not allow an immigrant into the U.S. Public charge has been around for maybe 100 years. It's been around a while. But unfortunately, there's a lot of fear and misinformation in the community around public charge. So the question that the government has to determine when they're going to grant someone a visa or let them in as a permanent resident is the immigrant likely to become primarily dependent on the government for subsistence? So that's been interpreted by many in the immigrant community to mean if I use any sort of public benefits, I won't be able to get my immigration benefit, which is not the case necessarily. So the factors that the government has to consider when they're deciding whether someone is a public charge or not, they look at their age. So if they're really young or really old, so they're less likely to be able to work regularly, that counts against them. If they're in poor health, it counts against them. What type of financial assets does the family have? Obviously, the more assets, the better, to be less likely to be determined public charge. Have you received public benefits? So under current policy, the only public benefits that count against you for public charge are TANF, which is welfare, so cash assistance, SSI, supplemental security income for folks who have a disability and are low income. And then long-term institutional care, like a nursing home that the government pays for. But public benefits, the use of public benefits is just one factor of many. And the other thing to keep in mind is often immigrants aren't eligible anyway for public benefits, and it's their U.S. citizen children who are eligible. But because of this fear, it can affect the children's health care. So again, if the immigrant parent is just applying for their kids and they're not receiving, it doesn't count against the immigrant parent. Even certain immigrant statuses, it doesn't count against them. Like if you're a permanent resident, it doesn't affect you, the inadmissibility ground. If you're a naturalized citizen, it doesn't affect certain victims of crime, like U visa petitioners, T visa petitioners, Violence Against Women Act petitioners. But I'm going to give you examples that I've encountered. Now, none of these are actually since the Trump administration started in January. Most of these are from his first term or during Biden's term. But this will just give you the example of how much fear there is among this in the community. So there was an immigrant parent who was afraid to have their child who had autism use County Board of Developmental Disability Services because they thought it would affect the immigrant parent status. There was an immigrant father afraid to apply for Medicaid for his pregnant teenage daughter because of public charge. Immigrant parent nervous to get Help Me Grow services for their child. And for anyone who doesn't know what Help Me Grow is it's early intervention, like speech therapy, physical therapy, occupational therapy that's provided for children under the age of 3. I even had a client who was a permanent resident already. She had a green card. She was a survivor of domestic violence, and she was afraid to apply for SNAP, otherwise known as food stamps, because of public charge. It just goes on, unfortunately. So if you know if a patient expresses their fear to you, please feel free to tell them to call legal aid. Dr. England mentions about medical letters of support. Medical letters of support can help in immigration cases, particularly psychological assessments can help in many types of immigration relief, like asylum, for example. You have to show past harm or fear of future harm, and a psychological assessment, and particularly if someone's been traumatized, can be evidence of that. Even if it's just a letter showing or verifying what diagnoses the immigrant themselves or their children have, because in many of the immigration forms of relief or waivers, they have to prove hardship. They have to prove that if they were removed to their home country, or if their family, or how would their family members suffer hardship if they were removed. And so if they have some sort of diagnosis where they're not going to be able to get appropriate treatment in their home country, a letter of support can help in that instance as well. I've heard like parents afraid to even send their children to school because of the recent emphasis on immigration enforcement, and parents who have not sent their kids to school. Of course, if they do that, there's a risk of truancy charges for the parent, and then of their child falling behind academically. Another way you may encounter the immigration world in your medical practice is you may have a patient ask you to sign an Form N-648, disability exemption. That is a form for someone who's applying to become a U.S. citizen. It's a form where they're asking for an exemption from the civics exam. So to become a U.S. citizen, you have to answer 6 out of 10 questions, out of a possible 100 questions, right about the U.S. form of government, history. And you also have to pass an English test for the most part, unless you've made certain age exemptions. But so a physician can sign this form if they believe that their patient has a condition whereby, because of such condition, they would not be able to learn the material to pass the civics exam, or they would not be able to learn English. Another way, I don't know if any of you all are civil surgeons, but if you're not, I would encourage you to become one if your institution allows it. So a civil surgeon is a doctor who has applied to USCIS for that designation. And anyone who's becoming a permanent resident or getting their green card has to first have an I-693, Form I-693 submitted. And the purpose of that is for the government to see whether they have any health and admissibility grounds. So a healthcare reason why they would not allow them. Usually it has to refer it to like contagious diseases, or if they believe the person is a danger to the community. So anyway, they have to fill out this form, and it's very expensive. Like at Legal Aid, the most affordable one we found, they charge $200, but there's a 5-month waiting list. So mostly, I think the physicians charge in the range of like $400, $500, maybe even more. And every single immigrant in the family needs one of these. So if you have a family of 5, they're becoming permanent residents, you can see how that would add up. So we definitely need more people to become civil surgeons. You can look on USCIS's website. And the other thing is that these exams are not covered by insurance. So that's another reason why they can become very cost prohibitive. I think that was all I was going to. Is there anything I didn't answer?
No, that was fantastic. So many challenges, I think, facing our folks who are trying to get their immigration status. And when I think about watching some of the late night TV, how many Americans have you seen that have citizenship that can answer 6 out of 10 civic questions? It's appalling when you see people who don't know those answers. So these are all the questions that I have thus far for our panelists. What I'd like to do now is throw this open to the audience. So if you have a question, please raise your hand. I will bring you the microphone right now. And then at the end, I'm going to give the panelists just a couple of minutes if they have anything further to kind of tie up their statement. So let me start right here.
Thank you. So my question falls somewhere between public benefits. So things such as the ACA, or if someone's taking use of a tax credit, does that play into anything? I don't understand the actual full review that happens when a visa holder is applying to become a citizen. So I'm just wondering, any tax, like, are there any negative consequences to something like that? Is that something that's just blown out of proportion? So again, or Obamacare, someone receiving a tax credit, is that going to be looked upon as, well, this person may actually be a drain, you know?
So I will say Obamacare under the first Trump administration was an issue. And we were advising clients not to participate in Obamacare. I think kind of the general rule is if the tax benefit is available to them and they are legally following the IRS tax code, they are fine. Where tax issues become, I think, relevant immigration-wise is when you start claiming people who are not in your family, or you're not paying your taxes and you're not filing your taxes. The Immigration Service is very closely tied to money, right? Not just how much we have to pay to file things, but they look at money in so many different types of applications. So tax returns, although we are not experts in tax returns, we become them very quickly because we are looking at tax returns all the time. So as long as they're following the code and those provisions, they're available to them, there's no problem in them taking them. There you go.
We have another question here.
It kind of relates to the same issue. There's a program, I think it's called the 401B. It's for if you don't have any insurance, you can get medications that are close to on a nominal, 340B. Yep. So does that? These are for people who don't have any insurance and are rightly so not availing Obamacare or Medicare or Medicaid. Does the hospital in any way report the utilization of that 340B facility, and could they get in trouble for that?
So I'll take this one, but I'm actually going to turn it into the audience. One of my colleagues is like a 340B expert, small or big, large E. But Mara, do you want to answer that?
Yeah, the question. The question is whether there's reporting related to 340B. There would not be. 340B is like a federal drug pricing program for safety net hospitals. So the drug discount accrues to the safety net hospital, and how that hospital then chooses to use that benefit, oftentimes it is to fund their financial assistance policies, which could be a pass-through, price or expanded ability to have a financial assistance program. But the 340B program is also much broader. Those funds can be used to expand access to services, to fund services that might otherwise not be possible through the hospital. So there would not be any concerns related to whether or not you are documented or undocumented, and whether you are receiving a drug discount from the hospital that's made possible through the 340B program.
Yeah, a lot of the federal grants require that you have to use 340B pricing. We used it in Ryan White for our for our HIV patients. So that was totally separate from any immigration.
I wanted to ask Counselor Martin, I totally agree, don't travel, but I was told that, what about advice using a burner phone and shutting off your computer at least when you're arriving, and then obviously if you have global entry, that probably would help, but I'm not sure immigrants can get global entry.
So that's very funny, because I'm traveling out of the country in 2 weeks, and our firm just had this discussion on whether I'm taking my work computer with me, because there is a specific executive order against immigration attorneys specifically. So what my social media, can they access my client database? So that's an excellent, very pertinent question. I have decided to send all of my items with my family who is traveling with me, so that I have nothing on my person, right? So they can't get access to my phone, they can't get access to my computer because I don't have it with me. Now, if you don't have the benefit of that, there is, and this is even, it was a little bit in the Trump 1.0, a little bit more now in Trump 2.0, their access to social media. So if you apply for a visa and you are outside the United States, you fill out what's called a DS-160 or a DS-260 form. Those forms specifically ask your social media handles. Do the officers go on and look at your social media? I don't know. But we have been told that at interviews here in the States now, they can access your social media. Now, whether that means I have to turn over my phone, whether that means I have to give you my login to my Facebook, which don't ask me because I don't even know it, I don't know. But we're advising our clients, leave your phones in the car, leave your computers in the car, because I don't know how far-reaching this is going to be.
We've got time for one more question. Does anybody have a question? Over here. Give me 1 second.
Thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us. One of the measures that you mentioned was speaking to making sure that your local police departments are made aware when ICE attempts to interfere with or take patients away from healthcare. However, there has been a concerning development where local police departments have been partnering with ICE. I know Cuyahoga County isn't one of those yet, but for practitioners who are working in a setting where there is such a partnership, what protocol should we follow then?
And that's an excellent question. I mean, I can speak from the healthcare system. Well, you get credit too. From the healthcare system, I mean, or even outside, just having a plan, right? It could be, maybe it's not going to be law enforcement, right? Because you don't have, that relationship with, Cleveland, municipality, but your administrator on call, or you have a lawyer, even if it's on a retainer or whatnot. It's really just to have a plan in place. It doesn't have to be law enforcement by any means. Sometimes it's just easier when you're having that peer-to-peer type conversation to like bring down the temperature, because that's really what you're trying to do, and to slow it down and make sure you get all the credentials and the paperwork needed to, at least hear what the request is and to assess the validity and if they have all the pertinent documentation.
Yeah, I was going to say it's a 287G agreement that the federal government has with local officials. You are right. Mayor Bibb has come out and said that he specifically will not participate in federal law. He's got enough problems dealing with the city issues, right? However, could that change? Absolutely. So when Michelle was talking, I was going to jump in, but I didn't want to interrupt you. It may not be ICE that shows up at your door. It may be the Cleveland Police Department, right? Or not now, the Cleveland Police Department. But there are, if you are in smaller jurisdictions or working in a hospital that services an underserved area, you are most likely in an area that probably has a 287G agreement, which means local law enforcement can enforce federal immigration laws, which is absolutely insane. However, it's happening, right? So you're right. It could be a local police officer that comes up. Whoever said that over there, you're right. A local police officer could serve you with a warrant, or could be coming in and asking about immigration status because they are now entitled to.
Yeah, we just looked today at Legal Aid on the map of 287G agreements. ILRC has it on their website. I think in Ohio it was just Seneca, which is out by Tiffin, somewhere in Portage County, and then Butler County, which is in the Cincinnati area.
Yeah, I don't remember the sheriff that was on the news for, what was that? Where he was, whoever supporting the Democrats, he was like, basically, I'm going to come out and get you if you had a Democratic sign in your yard. That sheriff, his department is doing this. Yeah, I know. Not that we're surprised, but.
So of course it sounds like if ICE shows up at the door, the key is protocol, 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 know who to contact, and have everybody just take their pulse, make sure that they're not getting too excited about all of that. Yes, Matt, I've got one more.
Point, not a question. They're armed thugs.
Yeah.
When they show up, I mean, and they're intimidating, and they're going to try and use that against you. And
Absolutely.
I've dealt with it in the past, not on this issue, but I used to take care of inmates, and when they used to come with their sheriff escorts, and would question my medical decision making. It's not an easy position.
Yeah, they're definitely like coming with cookies and milk, right? I mean, they're assuming you're not educated and you don't know what you're looking for and you don't know what your rights are, right? Whether you're here undocumented or whether you're documented, you still have Fourth Amendment rights. You do not have to speak. So all I can say is educate yourself, talk to your facilities, like Michelle said, figure out what the plan is, know what the plan is. The patient is looking to you because they're going to be hysterical if ICE is showing up looking for them. You need to be the calming force and saying, we have a plan here. We know exactly what's going to happen. Don't worry. We're going to figure this out.
Out of respect for everybody's time, I just want to make sure that all the questions that have been answered, if anybody on the panel has anything else that they would like to further add, anything that we didn't bring up, I'm sure that in the half an hour or so afterwards, people will be available for questions, but I do want to take the opportunity to say thank you to the panel here. And I'll see if Dominica or Jen have any further words.